Welcome to Mind, America's Lignite Energy Podcast, brought to you by the Lignite Energy Council of North Dakota. Here's your hosts, Kate Muggerud and Jeff Simon.
Right, and you guys, welcome to Mind, Lignite Energy in America. Excited to be doing another episode and just carrying on with this podcast. We are happy to have everybody joining us today. As usual, I have my friend and co-host, Jeff Simon.
Hello all.
And today, you guys, we got a great guest. Her name is Michelle Bloodworth. And I know I say this every week, but looking forward to some of the things that we're going to dive into. Michelle is the president and the CEO of America's Power. Michelle, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Now, Michelle, you're joining us from Virginia, right?
I am. Yes. Where I'm in Boston. Our offices are in Boston, so about 15 minutes from DC.
That is too cool. Now, Michelle, you have quite an impressive resume. I was just kind of diving into a little bit about your career, and tell our viewers, listeners, a little bit about what your current role is.
All right. So, my current role as president and CEO of America's Power, for those of you who may not be familiar with America's Power, we're the only national trade association which focuses solely on coal electricity. And so although our members include every aspect of the coal supply chain, so we have coal producers, utilities, generators, railroads, barge operators, and then manufacturers and suppliers in the coal supply chain. And although our members represent the mining and production, we solely focus on coal electricity. So the bulk of our mission is really to engage constructively with policymakers, elected and appointed officials. We work a lot with state regulators, federal regulators, stakeholders in the general public, and try to get our message out, like the great opportunity we've been given on the podcast today. We do work a lot with the media as well. Really utilizing the media as a resource to advocate for policies as it relates to the coal fleet. Thank you.
Go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off.
Part of our mission is to really ensure that policymakers understand the importance of a diverse electricity grid. Sometimes when we talk about a diverse electricity grid, some people don't define that as including coal. We certainly do believe coal is needed as part of a diverse electricity grid, whether that's for reliability, resilience, advocating for a level playing field in wholesale electricity markets like MISO, and also advocating for sustained investment in advanced coal technologies, because I personally believe that this country will be better off for a lot of different reasons if we do have a coal fleet of the future.
Very much agree with that as well. And I know I can speak for Jeff too. So now that is just all a lot, just so much stuff and so good information. Now 2020 has been a very interesting year for obviously many reasons, and a lot of us. Talk to me a little bit about, kind of how, and just especially as election year, I'm sure that it's keeping you on your toes.
Yeah, we, any election year keeps you on your toes, but I would say this election year is probably a lot larger lift and just, really polarized debate as it comes to energy. More so than I've seen it in many of the decades of my own career. I think that's for a lot of different reasons. One of the largest efforts that we've had getting back to that level playing field is to ensure during 2020 that there was not an extension of the production tax credit for both wind and solar, because we feel like, and again, I'm supportive of renewables. I do support all of the above. Mm-hmm. But we feel like renewables have already been subsidized for where they're commercially viable. They themselves say that they're more competitive in some instances than fossil fuels. And we really feel like that distorts wholesale electricity markets to allow all resources to have a level playing field. We certainly commend Senators Kramer and Hoeven, who have helped significantly in recruiting other folks in Congress to oppose an extension. So far, so good, knock on wood. We've also had a large effort in 2020 to really bring home what we feel like were sensible environmental regulations. We feel like the EPA and Administrator Wheeler have really done a good job in either staying, revising many of the rules that were put in place by the prior administration that we felt like were onerous. Again, we're all focused on clean energy, but it needs to be done in a cost-effective, sensible way. We do feel like the replacement rule for the Clean Power Plan is a really good rule because it gives states the flexibility and falls within the legal parameters of EPA's authority. And so we're hoping to have two early mover states who would submit a plan and get it approved by EPA, hopefully by the end of the year, no matter what happens with the election.
Michelle, in your open, you talked about kind of the importance of coal as part of the generating fleet. And as an association manager myself, I know a big part of the role is actually public education, helping the public understand the reality of the electric industry or any industry for that matter. And as an association exec, my constant frustration is this idea of the Green New Deal that somehow even Vice President Biden's campaign has talked about decarbonizing the electric fleet. Well, you and I both know 80% of our electricity right now is generated by either coal or natural gas. So talk about the challenge of helping the public understand reality here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think I'll use what we've been doing is trying to use California as an example to basically talk to policymakers, both Congress, state utility commissioners, governor's offices, of what happens when you move too far too fast. All of us know that this transition is taking place. That's why we support advanced coal technologies, is because we all want to ensure that we can have the cleanest energy possible. But at the same time, we have to ensure while that transition takes place that we can keep the lights on. So as we've looked at, we've done a lot of research and examination on California for that reason. It's kind of tied to whether that's clean energy standard, whether that's a state setting an RPS standard for 80%, by 2030 or 2040, whether that's a utility themselves who's also setting these goals. Because there are a lot of people who are going to play into how we keep the lights on in an affordable and reliable way. So as you look at California, California really had 5 different entities who were involved in electricity. So you have you have this governor, Newsom, and the prior governor, Governor Jerry Brown, who have played a role in issuing executive orders, which, like you said, have set a time frame for very aggressive and very quick movement to renewables, 50% by 2030. Then you also have the state legislature who passed very aggressive RPS standards during the past couple of years. Then you also have CalISO, which manages the electricity grid. You have the California Public Utility Commission, who determines how many resources each utility needs to have in order to assure reliability. And then you have another group called California Energy Commission, who does all of the forecasting. But all of those entities obviously together are making critical decisions, but also because you have so many players, all of them try to blame, the other one. So as we've looked at, California, there are a lot of different reasons, a series of reasons that California had 5 days of blackouts. But one of those certainly is extreme heat. So California was also an example of resilience. You know, what happens when you don't plan for these unexpected events, like very cold weather or very hot weather.
Mm-hmm.
And so in California, because they had moved from 2010, 5% of their generation came from renewable. Fast forward to 2020, right now it's 30%. So 19% comes from wind and 11% from solar. But then in 2030, it's going to be close to 50% of the generation. But that's really a very quick time frame for a lot of technology, including battery storage, that hasn't been developed. But in California, one of the reasons was extreme weather. Not only in California, but they rely on a quarter of their electricity from 10 bordering states who also experience hot weather. California has no coal, virtually no coal, some small cogen units. So they rely solely on natural gas and renewables. So not only did California lose a lot of, they call them controllable, dispatchable resources like coal, like gas, like nuclear, all of the bordering states at the same time are also have aggressive renewable portfolio standards. And so they, because of, you know, transmission congestion, loss of baseload resources, they were not able to provide that quarter of electricity on that peak hot day. Mm-hmm. The other, some of the other things that occurred is, you know, California also, because again, battery storage and even renewable and some of the intermittent generation, we're still learning a lot about what happens and how you plan and operate under a scenario where you have a lot more intermittent generation. And so they really, you know, although California had identified that if they had extreme weather, CalISO did a report and said, hey, we might have some problems with blackouts. They still didn't do anything to plan for that, to avoid it, where they said the probability would be 2.2% that the lights would go off. Obviously, we all know that was 100%. In addition to that, you know, their reserve margin, now they're saying, you know, I think it's probably too low, you know, because we've got a lot of intermittent. When you think about reserve margin, how much capacity do you need during a peak period? It's really not, in my opinion, the quantity of the megawatts, it's the quality of the megawatts. Mm-hmm. What are the type of attributes? One of those is fuel security. We all know coal has over 2 months of on-site stockpiles of coal, which is extremely helpful when you have issues like extreme events or cyber attacks or physical attacks. Which is why we continue to advocate and try to educate grid operators, state utility commissioners on the importance of really understanding the lessons learned from California. So whether you're in MISO or you're in PJM, that you can prepare for those events and ensure that you have an adequate amount of dispatchable resources like coal, nuclear, and even natural gas. I do think, though, as it relates to California, that there's going to be a lot of hard questions beginning to be asked. We've done about a dozen briefings with state utility commissioners, and, you know, a lot of what they're saying is, you know, I've never really thought about, I really probably need to do some more analysis that what my bordering state does when I had an abundance of coal and nuclear and I had a big cushion. Even the grid operators will admit this, you know, I didn't really have to worry about, you know, what all these other states were doing with their generation mix because I had so much, you know, dispatchable resources, and now that's really different. And so I think in many of these wholesale markets, they're beginning to relook at all of the way they do planning around resource adequacy, or really looking at the types of resources. Are we valuing those resources to make sure that they're there for as long as they're needed? You know, people can argue about how long we need coal and nuclear and natural gas. You know, I'm of the mindset that if we put enough investment like we have renewables, we will develop clean coal technology that can continue to provide all of those attributes that other resources can't provide.
Yeah.
It is one thing we're actively pursuing here in North Dakota. In fact, in the background you see behind me, that's Milton, our young station, and it's probably hard to see in that tiny little image, but there's
Oh, I
actually
see it.
a drilling rig on the site there that is drilling a test hole that will lead to a carbon sequestration project called Project Tundra. And I'm sure you're probably familiar with that. We're actively looking at that, and it's also a possibility at the site of Coal Creek Station. It's actually an ethanol company that's looking at sequestering carbon dioxide, but we're kind of on the cutting edge. What would you say about the prospects for continuing federal support for that? Particularly if we have an administration change here.
Yeah, that's a great question. I really feel like there is bipartisan support for carbon capture, utilization, and storage. Now, there are some, though, who are of the mindset that, they don't really want to invest as much in something that will help coal as it may renewables or other resources. But I do think there's been a lot of interest and advancement and education in technology. DOE has, with their Coal First project, has really advanced about a dozen projects. Some of those are field test sites and demonstration, but I certainly commend Minnesota. We have a member who's called Prairie State, who has one of the youngest coal plants in Illinois. They are also looking at CCUS, and they talk about it more as, we need to think about coal as a commodity, from the coal ash that can be sold for concrete and agriculture, from, carbon that can be used for enhanced oil recovery. The company that I worked for the most bulk of my career, did use a lot of enhanced oil recovery and was looking for carbon to buy a lot of carbon in order to increase shale gas production. So there's a lot of other markets for the byproducts of coal, and at the same time we can continue to reduce the cost of that technology and to try to make it more economical on a wide scale. But there are a lot of interest, certainly also because of oil and gas is interested. I mean, I think they realize carbon is certainly going to be at the forefront, and I think a lot of resources are investing a lot of their own money to try to advance that technology.
So you touched a little bit on, obviously we talked about the blackouts that happened in California specifically. Looking at that, what could, other states, or what do you feel could be done to make sure that it doesn't happen anywhere else? I mean, obviously not having power is not an option for most Americans. And so
Right.
What's your take on that?
Yes, so we think that grid operators need to do a lot more analysis looking at resilience. Certainly an attribute of that is fuel security. We think that NERC, which enforces reliability standards for compliance, the North American Electric Reliability Corporation, we work really closely with NERC. We think that they need to establish a standard for resilience, which also would include fuel security. Right now they have guidelines, but they don't have a standard.
Mm-hmm.
As it relates to states, we think that states, need to do their own analysis, whether they're in a wholesale market or not, and really look at the time frames of the standards that they're setting and ask the same question. Is the grid going to be reliable? Is it going to be resilient? What happens if we have a bomb cyclone or extreme hot weather? Mm-hmm. What happens if we have a physical attack or a cyber attack? Mm-hmm. So we think that the grid operators, not only do they need to do more analysis, but if FERC and NERC ever set criteria and a standard for resilience, then those attributes could be valued in the market, which would mean an owner like Minnesota and the state of North Dakota would receive that value, and the consumers of that state, it would roll back to them, because I would argue that because there is a lot of coal in North Dakota, it does enable other states that are a part of the MISO footprint to move to more intermittent and renewable generation. But if they don't have those baseload resources in the other bordering states, then they're not going to be able to move as quickly. But I think that value needs to come back to those resources in those states that are enabling that development. And right now, they're not being valued in these wholesale markets.
Michelle, where does that start? Is that something that FERC has to authorize the ISOs to do, or could MISO and the Southwest Power Pool do that now? Assign a value to resiliency and somehow socialize that cost, or how does that happen? What's the obstacle right now?
Yeah, we think the obstacle is that the leadership really needs to come from FERC. And so FERC, about 35 months ago, opened up a docket on grid resilience. They received probably more comments, thousands of comments, from really smart people, but they have yet to act on that grid resilience docket. That docket was not about a bailout for coal. That docket was really to establish criteria and to define what resilience is. We think fuel security is a part of an attribute that keeps the grid resilient. It's not the only one, because then that would allow the grid operators, in my opinion, then to be able to move forward and tailor to their own markets how those attributes need to be valued within, their own tariffs, their own stakeholder processes. But without that leadership coming from FERC, to me, the grid operators who have wanted to do more analysis, it's been really hard for them to get buy-in of their stakeholders without a broader definition coming from FERC. Obviously, NERC is also comes under FERC. So it'll be a combination of both NERC and FERC. So we recently have sent a letter to FERC reminding and encouraging them of their commitment, the own commitment they made about how important this docket was, that we hope that they will act soon, no matter what happens with the outcome of the election.
I know that's an incredible frustration on the part of the coal plant operators here to hear, the administrators and the managers of MISO say, we're going to need coal for, a long time to come to provide that baseload generating capacity. But yet the plants aren't running adequately or enough to make them financially viable without some sort of compensation for that resiliency. So we need coal, but coal's having a tough time financially right now.
Correct. I mean, we've talked to MISO, their leadership recently, and representatives of the Lignite Council were on the call as well. And they do agree that, as they move, once they get to 30-40% renewable, it gets really, really difficult without these dispatchable resources. But, I think we made some inroads. Most people don't think about the coal supply chain. So in order for, coal producers and mining, as you know, is a very capital intensive industry. And if coal plants aren't running, but they still have all those fixed costs, and it's not just them, it's the railroads, it's the barge operators. They need some certainty to make investment, even from, technology and maintenance and operation to determine, how long that coal plant's going to be there, number one, and how much it's going to run. But if there's not a certain level of, kind of floor for capacity factors for coal, then the coal supply chain may not, be there. Even as advanced technology is being developed. That's something MISO agreed. So did PJM. We've talked to their senior leadership. They haven't really thought about, does there need to be some thought to how they price that into the market to ensure that those attributes are there. The only thing that can be really frustrating, and I've worked for MISO and I have a lot of respect for the people at MISO, is we don't have a lot of time. I mean, this industry is very challenged, and these market reforms, they need to come quickly. So that's why we've been trying to beat the drum along with the Lignite Energy Council as it relates to FERC, at least taking the step, which we think will cause a lot more action within the wholesale markets.
So kind of, we talked a little bit about, 2020 and the whirlwind that's been, but when you look at the next 12 months and, obviously a lot of this will have to do with our election and how that ends up. But when you look at the next 12 months, what does that look like for America's Power? What does that look like for your industry right now?
Yeah, so obviously it depends, some of it depends on the outcome of the election.
Mm-hmm.
I do see, as it relates, if we have a Biden administration, I think we're going to see a lot more emphasis on carbon.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's going to be a movement to try to move very, very quickly, whether that's a clean energy standard, whether that's carbon tax, to try to move toward renewables.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think the way that we're going to certainly focus on is to educate policymakers about the example of California.
Mm-hmm.
And as we all support a move toward cleaner energy, if we do that without a key focus on reliability and affordability, coal still provides very, very low cost power, especially existing coal. Then we're not going to be able to keep the lights on, which obviously has its own consequences. So we're going to be focusing a lot to ensure that we don't have policies that set standards that really are going to impact us being able to keep our lights on, 24/7. That's certainly going to take a lot of help of allies as well and state policymakers. I think grid operators will actually be helpful as we try to educate. They're already doing that as they're looking at some of the legislation, the Green New Deal. You had the CEO of NERC on a panel recently say, that he didn't even think that was possible because battery storage is decades away from being able to operate, for more than 4 hours.
Mm-hmm.
I think we're going to have to, certainly as it relates to environmental policies, we're going to have an eye again, but there's going to be a lot of focus on carbon. As it relates to wholesale electricity markets and creating a level playing field, to me, that won't matter. The focus still needs to be where it is, no matter what happens with the election. I just think the way that we'll focus on those different areas to provide a level playing field, the strategy and the tactics may be different, but I think our overall emphasis will mirror what we've done in the past, except for I think we're going to have a greater focus on technology. So to me, the best way, no matter what happens with the election, is to lead with technology. Mm-hmm. I think we all have to continue to try to encourage policymakers to invest in advanced coal technologies like CCUS.
Yeah, yep, absolutely agree. Man, well, it sounds like you got a busy plate, and this next year is going to be nothing but interesting, I'm sure.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Awesome. Jeff, any follow-up? Michelle, you just really shared with us a lot, and I know we're going to take a while to kind of digest all this, and it's exciting to hear what's going on and kind of your perspective. I think it's definitely shed some light onto an area that I was not that familiar with, so I appreciate you joining us.
Thank you so much, and we've really enjoyed the opportunity to I really feel like we have a strategic partnership with the Lignite Council. It's certainly going to take all of us working together who still believe in the need for coal and the coal fleet. So that's been a bright spot in our relationship and kind of over the past year. So we hope to work more with them in the future.
Absolutely. Jeff, any follow-up?
Well, I think in Michelle's concluding remarks, she really hit upon something that regardless of who's in the White House, I think we can all embrace technology. That seems to be something where you can find bipartisan agreement that we need to find ways to improve the quality, the cleanliness of our energy supply. So that's a good path to chart for the coming year, I think.
Agree. One of the things that I'll conclude that Senator Manchin recently spoke at a CURT meeting, which focuses on clean coal technologies, is, he said what we need to focus on is innovation, not elimination. We don't need to eliminate coal. we need to innovate so coal does become cleaner and can provide all of the attributes that it does. I thought that was kind of a unique statement.
Wow, so
Yeah,
true.
we've heard our governor say something similar. He says innovation, not regulation. So we want to stimulate the industry to find a better way to do it rather than to force them through regulation.
Right.
Absolutely. Well, Michelle, thanks again for joining us. It was so great to connect with you and hear kind of what your vision is and what you're doing, and proud to be a partner with you.
All right. Well, you guys do a great job, and thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thanks, Michelle.
All right. Thanks.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Mind, America's Lignite Energy Podcast. For more information on lignite energy in North Dakota, visit lignite.com.